Greetings, sisters and brothers. I'm Milton Ali Mahdi. As many of you know, I publish Black Star News here in New York City. I teach African history at the Africana Studies Department, John Jay College here in New York. And I teach journalism at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. I'm very happy to be with you, comrades. I'd like to start off by thanking Dorcas and all her colleagues associated with Uganda is bleeding. Uganda is bleeding, but Uganda will not be bleeding forever. And that is why we have these conversations, because you want to end the destructive dictatorship of Field Marshal Yoweri Museveni and his deputy killer, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. So, sisters and brothers, I want to also thank a tireless comrade in this struggle, Dr. Nico. And I understand it is his birthday today. Unfortunately, I cannot sing. So I cannot sing happy birthday to Dr. Nico, but I wish him well. I wish him a happy birthday and many, many more as we all engage collectively in this struggle to create a better Uganda, a prosperous Uganda. So let me get straight to the matter at hand today, which is the major news this week in the New York Times on July the 11th, and then followed by a similar article in The Guardian on July the 12th, and then other publications thereafter. So let me read the headline from the New York Times, first of all. Uganda president and his son are accused of crimes against humanity. This is one of the most serious headlines I've seen in the New York Times in a very long time. The New York Times has often been too soft on Field Marshal Museveni, but this is as explicit and as hard a headline that you can expect to get in a publication like the New York Times, which is the establishment media in the West. And when the New York Times starts reporting on an African dictator being accused of crimes against humanity and uses that kind of headline, that means the sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N, the sun is beginning to set on that particular dictator. It reminds me of when they started writing about Mobutu in a certain way after he had been sustained by the United States for 37 years in power. The dictator in Uganda has also been sustained for 37 years in power. Now the language in the establishment media is changing in terms of the coverage, and that could suggest that the sands are shifting for this dictator. Let's look at the headline from The Guardian. Ugandan president and son accused of sponsoring violence in ICC testimony. It's a good headline. It's not as strong as the New York Times, but it's still good. And obviously both are referring to the complaints that have been formally filed by the lawyer representing the many victims of atrocities in Uganda. And one of the most well-known victims, of course, is Kakwenza, Rukira Bashaida, the writer, whom I hope you will also invite to have him speak on this major news report, because he's also quoted in the New York Times article. So before I discuss the elements of this article, in my brief remarks, which will not last more than 10 minutes, let me bring up one issue which to me is very important. Have you tweeted today concerning the tyranny and atrocities in Uganda? Have you tweeted this week? Our struggle is a non-stop struggle. We have the luxury, particularly us outside Uganda, of being in a position to engage elected officials in the countries where we reside. And one very effective way to engage them is by tweeting. If you cannot go to physical protests, even if you can go to physical protests, combine the two. They're very effective. If you tweet and you tag the appropriate officials, they will see it and they will not be able to ignore. So now here's my suggestions. Capture a screenshot of both headlines, the one in the New York Times and the one from The Guardian, and tweet those on a regular basis. And when you tweet, make sure that you tag the appropriate officials. So for example, the International Criminal Court, we cannot afford to let them forget these headlines. It is up to us to press them and make sure that the investigation is carried out and that these two co-dictators, co-killers, are indicted, Field Marshal Museveni and General Kainerugaba. So when you tweet to the International Criminal Court, you must say, Prosecutor Karim, his first name is Karim, his last name is Khan, you indicted President Putin in record time. The suffering of the people of Uganda are no less painful than anyone else's suffering. That is an example of what you should say to him. You can come up with your own comments, but make sure that we do not want to be treated like second-class citizens of the world. And of course, his Twitter handle is Karim Khan. So it's at Karim Khan QC. Karimkhan QC. Karim Khan. And also the International Criminal Court at INTLCRIMCOURT. You then should tweet the same screenshots to the President of the United States and the Secretary of State and ask them, how can you allow billions of dollars in US taxpayer money and US weapons to go to these killers? And the Twitter handle for the President of the United States is at POTUS, POTUS, which stands for President of the United States. And the Secretary Blinken's Twitter handle is at Sec Blinken, so at SEC BLINKEN. You should also tweet those same screenshots to the following three leaders of Congress. So tweet to Senator Menendez at Senator Menendez, SenatorMenendez. The second person you should also tag is at Leader McConnell. This is Mitch McConnell. He's the Republican leader in the Senate. At LeaderMcConnell. And then also at Speaker McCarthy, who is Mitch McCarthy, and he's the Republican House leader. of the House of Representatives, at Speaker McCarthy, at SPEAKER MCCARTHY. Sisters and brothers, during the liberation struggle against colonialism, many of our ancestors had to go to the bush, giving up their normal lives, sacrifice in the interest of liberating the African continent. So we had in Mozambique the MPLA, we have the FNL in Algeria, we had the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, KFLA in Kenya. The British demonized them as Mau Mau, but their true name was Kenya Land and Freedom Army. We had SWAPO in South Africa. We had the ANC. We had the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau. We had Frelimo, of course, in Mozambique, and many others. But these were some of the key liberation armies. And why am I bringing this up? In the 21st century, tweeting is almost the equivalence of going to the bush. So they made a significant struggle. We can tweet from our office, from our bedrooms, from the streets, from our cars, from the bus, from the train, while sitting in the park. That is the very least that we should be able to do. That is hardly a sacrifice. So I urge you, please do your part. Tweet on a daily basis. It is up to us to make sure that these headlines pay off and that there's no going back for these co-dictators, General Yoweri Museveni and General Muhoozi. But since Museveni is senior to Muhoozi, let's refer to him as Field Marshal from now on. All right, so I wanted to get that out of the way because to me that is the most important message I can pass on today. In terms of the allegations in the ICC complaint by the lawyer, Bruce Afran, who is a human rights and civil rights lawyer here in the United States, the details are horrific, as many of us know. They're not shocking. They've been ongoing in Uganda for a long time. Electric shocks, people having their teeth forcefully removed, people having their nails removed, people having their genitals crushed. In the case of Kakwenza, you saw the scars on his back from the whipping and the skin being peeled off with pliers, sexual assaults, the most horrific abuses, waterboarding. And then, of course, many have been killed. So there's no need for me to go into the details that are in this complaint. The most important thing for us is to make sure that we push this complaint, we push these headlines. When you go to any demonstration, make sure you blow up the screenshot from the New York Times headline and the Guardian headline. Big signs, big posters should be made of those blown up screenshots. And that will also be your contribution to the liberation struggle. Also, when we tweet, another tweet should go to the IMF and World Bank. How can you provide billions of dollars to these two killers? And when you send the tweet, make sure you have those screenshots as well from the New York Times article and from the Guardian. And the World Bank Twitter handle is @World Bank, @WORLDBANK. And for the IMF is @IMF News. So it's @IMF News. So I wanted to make my remarks very brief. I'm just going through some of the notes I prepared as I was getting ready for these short comments. I want to make sure that I did not leave out anything that I think is critical. You can also, of course, go to my own Twitter feed at Ali Mahdi, and you can see some of my own tweets. I tweet every day. I may miss a day. In 1 week, I may miss one day sometimes because, I'm caught up like maybe preparing lessons or working on some other projects. But on a weekly basis, I try to make sure I tweet at least 4 or 5 times, even 6 times if I don't do it on a daily basis. So that is why I started off by talking about the importance of us engaging in the struggle and tweeting. All right, so there's one other issue that I want to talk about before I run out of my allotted time. And that is the issue of diverting attention. The dictator has a PhD. Field Marshal Museveni has a PhD in lying, in stealing elections, in killing, in torture, but most of all, in diverting attention. So he always does that. Let me give you some recent examples. When he was facing a lot of pressure after the tragedy of Ugandan soldiers being killed in Somalia by Shabab, what did he do? He signed the anti-LGBTQ law in Uganda. And immediately that became worldwide news. Nothing else about the tragedy in Somalia, which would raise questions. What is Uganda doing in Somalia? Why is this open-ended operation? How could troops have been so carelessly deployed that so many of them could have been killed? With the regime itself saying more than 50 and Al-Shabaab saying more than 130. You can never know the real number because the dictator is such a pathological liar. But nonetheless, he changed the news cycle by starting to yell, "Oh, kill the gays, kill the gays." And he knew that would divert news. And then shortly after that, what happened? The massacre of students in Kasese. I'll be very honest with you. I don't believe anything from this dictator. He's a liar until proven otherwise. So the timing of the killing of all these students, to me, was a bit too suspicious. I think the jury is still out. I need more information on that tragedy. And now the most recent incident. The news of the ICC complaint. What did he do this week? Just yesterday, he tried to divert attention again by trying to talk about the ADF, saying former President Joseph Kabila harbored the ADF in Congo, and that's why they've become such a problem now. Trying to ignore the major news of the ICC, right, by trying to divert attention. But I'm happy to say the only major media that picked it up was Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera fell for the propaganda. I think the others are learning their lessons now. After Kasese, when the BBC, for example, had a headline saying, ADF, ISIS-linked group attacked students, without any attribution. And of course, I was very critical of that headline, and I tweeted it. I said, it could have been as well just written by Field Marshal Museveni himself. So I think they're learning their lessons, becoming a little more critical, although Al Jazeera fell for the trap this time. So what did I do? I did some research, and I found a headline from the New Vision from about 10 years ago, and I tweeted it, so you can go to my page at Ali Mahdi. 10 years ago, the headline was Museveni praises Kabila for fighting ADF. The same Kabila that is accusing just yesterday of harboring the ADF. So he's such a liar that he forgets his lies, you see? So I tweeted and I said, major media, all you have to do is Google and you'll be able to expose this guy's lies. So, but I am a bit fearful, and I'll tell you why. Because now that he's talking about ADF again, after the ICC headline, it means something terrible could happen in Uganda. And he's going to use the ADF as a scapegoat again. I think he uses the ADF the way he used to use the LRA, Lord's Resistance Army, with Joseph Kony, to cover up for his own atrocities in the northern part of Uganda. I think there could be a similar pattern that is ongoing now. So I urge fellow Ugandans, sisters and brothers, beware. Beware. People that go out to like clubs, I think even students at schools must be alert, very suspicious. Have your eyes always, wide open and your ears, and listen to what's going on. We cannot trust this horrific dictator with anything. So those are the main points that I wanted to cover today. I think, obviously, I cannot take questions today. I cannot engage in conversation. So I look forward to my next visit so we can have a fruitful interaction. Thank you so much for your time. Remain vigilant and dedicated. And now with the ICC headline, please, sisters and brothers, let's redouble our effort in the struggle to liberate our country. A luta continua. Thank you.